Hey everyone, this is my Genesis summary video. I'm going to try to keep my personal comments to a minimum here, except when I notice internal inconsistencies within the story or when I have questions. So let's get this started. First thing I didn't really know, Genesis actually starts with two creation myths. The first is really small. It's just a few pages really, and I suspect it was included for just a single detail, and that was on the seventh day God rested. That seems to be the source, original source in the Bible anyways, of that line. The second creation myth is much more detailed. It's pretty much the pop culture version of the story. Adam is created, he's kind of all important. He names everything else, he gets lonely, God creates Eve, there's a talking snake, they eat the apple, etc., etc. The interesting bit here is that God tells Adam and Eve that eating the fruit of knowledge will kill them. But it turns out it doesn't. It's the fact that God got mad at them and kicked them out into the real world that exposed them to death. The knowledge itself didn't do anything. Next is Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel. I found it odd, but Abel is everybody's favorite, including God's. Cain gets really jealous and ends up killing him. And God curses him to be a vagabond forever. And then things get a little strange. Cain marries and has kids, founds a city, seems to have a pretty good life. And two questions popped into my head right away. First, what happened to this curse? Because apparently it didn't take, but, you know, it's clearly stated, God curses Cain to be a vagabond forever. Second, who in the hell is Cain's wife? Where did she come from? I mean, so far we've got Adam, Eve, and Cain on planet Earth, and that's it. So, I mean, if you've got some kind of information about theories about where Cain's wife came from, you know, whether she's just some person who popped up out of nowhere, or she happens to be some unnamed sister, I don't know, but please send along any information you got on that, because it's weird stuff. Anyway, after several generations, God doesn't really like what he sees, so he limits the human lifespan to 120 years, and that'll be important later, and then tells Noah to build his ark. I'm not going to go into details about this. The story really is pretty much the one you know, with the exception of the fact that there are, it seems to me that there's two different versions of the story kind of intertwined, because some of the dates seem to kind of go, you know, 40 days and 40 nights to 150 days, and, you know, kind of goes back and forth a bit. But, I mean, two different original stories explains that easily. There was one line I did find interesting, though, and that is that murder is punishable by death. God actually gives kind of his first commandment, say. And it's, you know, very early on, which is interesting. It doesn't stop anybody, including God, but it was interesting. The next story is the Tower of Babel. Not really anything interesting or surprising here either, except for the fact that the previous chapter ends by saying that there are multiple languages on Earth, and then this chapter starts by saying there's only one, and then explains why we have many. So, Now, the next character in this story is Abram, and he has a few adventures that are chronicled in the Bible. God tells Abram that he's been blessed, and God is going to make him rich and powerful and rule over all the earth and all the rest of that stuff. So Abram travels around, and on his journey he does a few things. One of the first things, though, is him and his wife Sarai end up in Egypt, I believe it was. And Abram tells Sarai to tell everybody that they're not actually husband and wife, they're brother and sister. It turns out both are actually true, they share the same father, but this lie gets repeated a few times, and God always goes out and punishes Sarai's lovers, doesn't punish Sarai herself, just her lovers, and then they turn around and give Abram and Sarai tons of money and property and kick him out. Another common theme in Genesis starts here too. Sarai can't have kids, and for some reason it's always the woman's fault. So she gives Abram her slave Hagar to have kids with instead. And if anybody knows of any kind of source that says this is a cultural norm, I would love to see it. It seems really strange to me. At any rate, it works, and Abram and Hagar have a son, Ishmael. Now, when Abram is 99 years old, apparently, God officially starts his covenant with the Hebrews. He says that he will give Abram's family everything: money, power, riches, land, the whole world, in essence, as long as they circumcise all males 8 days old or older. Which is kind of strange reciprocation, but oddly appropriate for a God that seems to just love flesh sacrifices. God also renames Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. Now, there's no reason given in the Bible, so if you have a good reason why he does this, then send it along. I'd love to see it. Seems like a very random thing to do. The next story here is about Sodom and Gomorrah. There's two important things here that aren't all that well known, and the rest of it is pretty much what you've already heard before. Now, first, Abraham actually stands up to God and asks him not to kill people who haven't done anything wrong. God ends up saving like 3 people, so he doesn't really listen to Abraham. And second, there's almost an inner monologue of God himself in this chapter, trying to decide whether or not he should tell Abraham about this plan of his for Sodom and Gomorrah, because he knows Abraham will object to the plan on moral grounds. In the end, though, both cities are wiped out. After giving Abraham and Sarah a son, God decides to test Abraham by demanding his son's life in sacrifice. And suddenly gone is Abraham's conscience that he had with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He just basically says, all right, cool, no problem. And of course doesn't have to go through with it. But certainly puts an odd spin on the character of Abraham here. This is not such a great spin on God's character either. Now, Sarah dies at 127 years old, and Abraham at 175 years old. And this is where God's limiting of the human lifespan to 120 years kind of falls flat. Like Cain's curse, it doesn't seem to have actually taken. I'm not sure why he even bothered with this either, but it won't be the last time this has a little hole in it. Now, what follows are stories of Abraham's son Isaac and his grandson Jacob, but really these stories are almost retelling of Abraham's. For instance, Isaac repeats the whole "don't say I'm your husband, say I'm your brother" lie. And Jacob's 2 wives, also happen to be his cousins, have this baby-making contest that includes 2 of their slave girls, and they end up with like 14 sons total. Now, there's one little bit at the end of this section of Genesis that's kind of interesting. A daughter of this, the main family here, her name is Danae, has sex with a Hittite. Now, consensual or not isn't specified. I'm assuming it wasn't, but if you could provide any proof of that would be great. Anyway, the guy in this story really wants to marry Danae. He's apparently fallen completely in love with her, and he wants to marry her. Danae herself is not consulted. At least not, explicitly mentioned in the Bible that she wasn't consulted. But the Hebrews as a whole say no, because the Hittites are not circumcised. So all the Hittite males get together and decide, well, our brother wants to marry this girl, and this is the condition. They're willing to do it. So they basically all go out and circumcise themselves. And while they are all still in pain, the Hebrews walk in and wipe them all out, and end up taking all their women and children as slaves. Nice people. Now, there's another name change here. Jacob becomes Israel, although everyone, including God, keeps calling him Jacob, so I don't know why God even bothered, but and Jacob dies at 180 years old. Okay, we're almost done. The last character here is Joseph, and he's Israel's youngest son. Now, he had a dream that he'd rule over his brothers one day, and so he told his brothers about this, and they were not all that impressed. And to show Joseph how impressed they were, they decided to kidnap him and sell him into slavery in Egypt. Family is awesome. So in Egypt, Joseph discovers he has a talent for decrypting dreams. Now, the Pharaoh had a dream that Joseph was able to decrypt that says that there will be 7 years of great harvests, bumper crops in Egypt, and 7 years of famine. And the Pharaoh, in appreciation for this interpretation, decides he's going to put Joseph in charge of buying all the excess food for the first 7 years and then selling it all back to people in the second 7 years. And as soon as the famine hits, the Hebrew people go through all their food, and they end up going to Egypt to have to buy it. Thus, the prophecy is fulfilled. Now, the very last bit of Genesis is actually oddly similar to the first bit. Not in content, but in form. And that's that there are 5 different accounts of Joseph's death, and none of them agree in terms of how old he actually was. But again, the 120 years doesn't seem to apply. And that's it. So if you have any questions or any explanations for any of the weird stuff, please pass it along. And next is my impressions video. Thanks, everyone.